caring for our land. Growing our essentials. Cultivating our future. Every producer leaves a legacy. Our Amazing Grasslands.
The Carmichaels run a pretty neat outfit by Faith, South Dakota. They've continued to break up pastures into smaller and smaller sections and have seen the grass respond positively and their herd size increase, while teaching the next generation lessons they'll take with them for life.
The guy that homesteaded this place come in 1909. My grandpa came in 1920 and worked for him. He was just 12 years old. And then he went off to the service, and when he come back from World War II, he married my grandma and bought this place in '45. He raised his family here, 6 kids. All I wanted to do through school was ranch. And so when I was a junior in high school, I actually leased this place from my grandparents, and then I moved here right after high school and married my wife. 3 years after that, we raised 4 children here. They only had 4 pastures, just seasonal pastures, and then so when we come here, we started chunking things up into sections and then half sections, and as we noticed spot grazing and different things happening, we went full forward into grass management, I guess. Shannon teaches school, and so whenever she's here, she's involved and she's helping, and whether it's moving cows or calving, and then the kids have been a huge asset, and I think it's good for them that they've learned work ethic and learned how to go out in the world and be leaders and be overcomers instead of succumbers. You know, so they've been able to be independent thinkers here and then go out and apply that to wherever they're at in the world or in life. My grandpa run just pretty much set stock, and he was good to the grass. He was a conservationist at heart. We had a workshop here with Wayne Berry, and Ryan had brought him down, and that really kind of drove us into overdrive, I guess, is wanting to do something. And truth be told, our first motivation was economical, because we heard that we could run twice as many cows. And as we got into it and started managing our grass better, we realized we didn't have to run twice as many cows because we were grazing longer in the year. And as soon as that mindset changed, then our grass improved, and pretty soon we were running twice as many cows.
When we first started this deal, I thought he was just totally crazy. This is not how things are supposed to be done. It's just supposed to be, we ride out, we gather, and we calve cattle. But when we started shrinking things down, I just kind of noticed that there was a lot more reward through all of that, because you saw the cattle growing, you saw the grass growing, you saw more interaction with the family being a little bit together, and they knew what jobs they could do, and things just went a lot smoother.
My grandpa, when he had cattle here, they pretty much just grazed in the draws, and they didn't have to go to the hillsides or nothing. And we've changed that to where they go into a spot and they graze it out in 2 or 3 days, and then they're moved to a new spot. And so it's more management as far as moving cattle, but it's not more work because they pretty much move themselves. They come when they're called and told to move. Don't forget everything that Grandpa knew. My grandpa started calving in the middle of April when he lived here. And so I was going to show him how it's done, and we went to calving cows the 1st of March and calving heifers in February. And now we calve everything in the middle of April in May. So there's a reason they do things sometimes. It's working with nature instead of against nature. We fenced everything into half sections and seen what it did, and we were still spot grazing some, and then we went to quarters. And then the drought of 2012 hit, and my oldest son, Kenny, poly-fenced every quarter into 40s with temporary fence, and so we were moving fence all the time, and we just allotted so much for so many days. And after we seen how that worked, and we regrew more grass than the neighbors actually grew that summer, and then we jumped into adjusting how we were doing it, and so we started building high tensile fence and splitting them quarters into thirds. And as we go in, the cattle will try to graze everything they can because it's a competition, because they're only there for a few days, and so they trample part of it, which helps build biodiversity and build soil, getting that back in contact. They take the other part and they defecate and urinate on the rest of it, which is actually fertilizer. And urea, as people buy commercial fertilizer, we have it right there. The cows just spread urea all over it, and so when it gets rain, it just responds with growth.
When I first moved out here 20-some years ago, I was, of course, not an avid rider. I didn't know a lot about the ground, but we had one place on the south end of the place that was called Cactus Patch, and that's what it was. It was just cactus all the time. The cattle didn't like grazing around it. It had a little dam hole there, and that was probably my first spot of when we started doing more grazing rotations and bringing a few more cattle in, was the grass was overtaking the cactus. So then I was like, okay, maybe we'll put another fence in. But I think just watching spots like that, because it took a long time even for that area to work into grass. And I mean, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of time and a lot of work, but I think in the end there's a big reward.
To me, it's about God's creation, how amazing it is. We're really not creating anything, we're discovering what's already there and what can happen if you're doing it. You know, the first thing to get into is waste not, want not. So you try to use the grass that they're not using, and you get more production that way. The first step would be water development, because that's probably the biggest daunting task, is water. It's not that hard to build a fence, it's hard to get water everywhere. Just split something in half and see what it does, because you increase your efficiency so much just by moving them and letting that stuff rest that much longer. If I was talking to somebody from the city about what we're doing here, it's range health, because as you can see out there, we have ground cover and it's holding up the water and it's making the water cleaner. The riparian areas are all grassed over, even where we've grazed, there's good cover. And so it's a natural system that's healthy and it's good for the environment. It's helping it. It's recycling what it's produced. So if you're looking for resources to do this, the South Dakota Grasslands Coalition would be the perfect place to start, because they have so many education opportunities and the mentorship list, and a lot of people that are willing and wanting to help you and teach you, you know, and to broaden your horizons, I guess.
Although picturesque, ranching along the Missouri River near Chamberlain, South Dakota can be challenging. Since the 1880s, Grandview Angus's generations have been meeting that challenge. Through good management, they're continuing their legacy of conservation-minded cattle production.
My great-grandfather homesteaded the Grandview Angus Ranch back in the early 1880s. I was born and raised here. My grandfather and father were both real interested in conservation and preservation of wildlife. So they entered into the first Great Plains contract in South Dakota, which was in March of 1958. The contract consisted of building dams and dugouts, shelter belts and cultivation of them, terraces. There was some dikes put in and ground stabilization. They did some interseeding of alfalfa and native grasses. And one of the things my grandfather was quite concerned about was, we're right here along the Missouri River, and they built the dam down at Fort Randall. And when the reservoir flooded here, there was a lot of trees and cover for wildlife down along the river. And so he was real concerned about that. So part of the Great Plains contract, he wanted to make sure that a wildlife habitat windbreak was put in, so that was 16-acre wildlife windbreak was installed. And some of the challenges right now, like last year, we had so much precipitation that river hills there's a lot of slide areas developing. This year we had to replace a lot of fences. The area had slid and the fences were down and buried. And another one of the challenges is what I call the green glacier of cedar trees taking over the pasture along the river. The red cedar along the river has developed into more of a challenge. When I first came home, my dad had about 120 pairs down in the river pasture, and last year I was only able to have 85 down there. With the amount of moisture we had, I could have had more, but last year, but that's kind of what I've been shooting at. To get rid of the red cedars, it was probably 5-6 years ago, the Conservation District came out with their grinder, and a couple areas down in the hills, they eliminated the cedars with that. I joined the Burn Association. The county's kind of along the Missouri River here. I would like to try and burn some in the future, but I'm getting old enough to try and get an area ready so that you can safely burn it is kind of a problem for me. Plus, the good burn season is right during calving season, so it's kind of hard to take time off. Our ranch here has a variety of terrain. We start here on the east side of the river. It's kind of flat for some farmland, but as you go west, it gets hillier, and as you get down in the river hills, that's where it's a lot of slide areas. There's what we call manganese hills. They're black hills where really nothing grows on them. A few years ago, we bought a pasture up north where earlier today we moved the cattle out of. When we got that pasture, it had been overgrazed for quite a few years. So that was kind of the area that I started with cross fencing and rotational grazing to try and get that back into better use.
Over the years, I have had the opportunity to work with Louie, and we've done some planning and implemented some cross fences and some waters so he could do some more rotational grazing.
With rotational grazing and cross fencing, I realized that I didn't have as much runoff anymore into my stock dams, which is good. You're taking the moisture and using it for growing grass is what you want to, but didn't have a reliable water source. So that's when we went with the NRCS, and they helped me put in pipelines and some more cross fences and tanks, and so I could develop my grazing from that. Early in the season, I maybe 4 or 5 days in a paddock before I moved to another one and on the cool season grasses.
Once you get on top here and on the flat, you get more of the loamy soils and that kind of stuff, and so you see a lot more invasive species like the brome and Kentucky bluegrass. And I think Louie has been doing a really good job of taking advantage of that stuff. And you know, when it's growing early in the spring and it's growing fast, he's trying to move through them quickly to get it utilized, and then he gets it some rest, and then comes back and hits it again. So he's doing what he needs to stay productive and keep the ground productive. So his rotational grazing has really, I feel like, made a big difference in his plant communities out there.
I guess my plan was with rotational grazing and everything was to hopefully that I would be able to survive a dry year by having the pastures in better shape so that I could make it through those drier years, and I was able to make it through.
The first year that I actually started in Chamberlain, he let us have a tour out here on his place. We got to showcase what he was doing and show other people the good things that he was doing and the grass that he was growing through his rotational grazing and resting. He also has been gracious enough to let us use his land to do some rangeland days so we could educate the kids and teach them how to identify grasses and soil types and rangeland sites and that kind of stuff. He's allowed us to do that out here on his place too.
Depending on what time of year it is, a good day going out is to go out when I'm calving and find several live calves and not have to worry about bad weather. There's something about being out with nature and seeing calving, and it's something that just makes you want to stay here and continue doing this.
Way up in the northeast corner of South Dakota is a unique and special place. The Bean family has been working with nature there for generations. Their ranch is filled with wetlands and biodiversity, a direct result of partnerships and patience. One of my favorite grasses is Big Blue Stem. See if you can spot some of the best footage of it coming up on their outfit.
Be curious and be willing to learn your whole life. Patience is a quality that you need if you're going to sustain something over a long period of time. Ralph Waldo Emerson has a saying, and I'm not too good at quoting or at poetry, either one, but he says, adopt the pace of nature. Patience is her secret. You know, we could have, and the ancestors that have gone before them, we could have done a lot of things that would have probably milked more profit out of the land in the short term, but what would it have left as a result? You know, either somebody else to try to clean it up or to try to restore it.
There's a lot of conservation stories that are centered on having to fix things, and you don't have to fix what you never broke. So that's not to take away anything from those that have inherited things that are broken. You know, I look at my own little place, it's broken. I have to fix it. I have to work really, really hard to fix it. The Bean family for a few generations now has had the foresight to say, you know, if we don't break it, we don't have to fix it.
There's a big thing now called regenerative agriculture, but if you don't destroy it, you don't really need to do that. And we've kind of done that with a lot of our environment. We kind of tend to use it up faster than it's made. I'm not saying it's all wrong, I'm just saying it's hard to have a balance there.
I first met Neil back in the early 1990s. The service had a program where we restored wetlands on Conservation Reserve Program lands and pasture lands and other areas. And Neil didn't have any on his Conservation Reserve land, but he did have a couple drained wetlands that were in his pasture. Not necessarily land that was the original bean ranch, but as they grew larger and purchased more land, some of those areas had wetlands to restore, and Neil was all for that. The wetland restoration involves installation of a ditch plug in a drainage ditch. The areas that we did restore those wetlands in, they were areas that had recently been farmed, and Neil seeded all those areas back to grass. Early in the 1990s, we had a called a Wetland Creation Program, and Neil was the chairman of the Marshall County Conservation District, and he signed the very first MOU with Partners for Wildlife to construct water sources for cattle. And in the same token, then we did construct several ponds on Neil's land. Wetlands are important on this ranch. First of all, what I like best is wildlife are attracted to wetlands. If you don't believe me, go out there early in the morning and try to shoot this video. You probably wouldn't be able to hear me talk. They're important also because they provide a water source for cattle and forage. The soil holds that moisture, so in dry years, the grasses and vegetation that the cattle eat are attracted to that. Wetlands also are nutrient traps that keep the nutrients up on the landscape instead of down in the lakes or rivers. They recharge the aquifer. Ecosystems can
cover huge areas, or they can be smaller, like a unit like a ranch or something. And ecosystems are like a giant spider web, in my estimation. Every strand is connected to every other strand, and if you watch a big wolf spider in the barn where they have a spider web built, and you watch a fly come along and he hits it and this wolf spider's over here, he immediately goes over, sucks the juice out of the fly, whatever. And if you break one of those strands, the spider web will still function pretty well, but it will never be as good as it was when all the strands were there. And if you break too many of them, you break down the very structure of the spider web. And that's all the plants and animals and living things in an ecosystem, are the strands in that spider web. We break one, well, so what? It's not a big deal. You break a couple, it might still work. You start breaking too many of them, it breaks down the ecosystem and we don't have what we had before. So that's what I'm saying, patience and not just trying to get everything you can in a short period of time. That's kind of counterproductive to what we're trying to do. So.
This isn't a place that is like most, and the reason it is this way is because of the conservation mindset and not to exhaust all the things that we have here, wildlife included. You have kind of almost a duty to the land to treat it well. If I have kids and they are interested in coming back here, then I hope that I'd be in a position that they certainly could. And I hope that they would have that proper mindset instilled in them by that time, that they would do well with it, whether or not I'm here.
As long as Nate remembers what Grandpa said about flexibility, about rolling with nature, about not trying to dominate it, going at the pace of nature. This ranch might look different in 100 years, but I bet it's going to look a lot the same.